The alarm on Vareth Station did not wake Darren Cole. He was already awake, already in the engine bay, already elbow-deep in a problem that had been getting worse for 6 hours. The Cradle of Rust was not a pretty ship. It had dents where there should have been hull plating, and welds where there should have been dents. It smelled like burned coolant and old coffee, and the particular kind of exhaustion that only comes from a crew that has been running cargo routes for too long without a real break. But it flew. Darren made sure it flew. The thruster coupling had fused sometime during the last jump. It happened with older ships. The metal expanded under pressure. The housing locked. And if you did not catch it fast enough, the whole assembly would seize and you would be drifting. They had caught it. Barely. Captain Lena Marsh had brought the cradle in on 2 functioning thrusters and a prayer, and now it sat in docking bay 7 of Vareth Station while everyone waited for Darren to fix it. The problem was the heat. The fused coupling was still radiating. The thermal sensor on Darren's handheld read the surface temperature and then blinked twice, like it was confused. He tapped it. It blinked again. He looked at the number and nodded to himself. Sova arrived at the entrance to the engine bay at that moment. He was Vareth, a tall species, gray-skinned, with eyes set wide on a narrow face. He was the station's logistics officer assigned to oversee the repair, and he had brought 2 station engineers with him. Both of them were carrying full thermal handling equipment, insulated suits, sealed gloves, the kind of gear that cost more than Darren's monthly pay. Sova looked at Darren. Darren was wearing a work jacket, canvas. The sleeves were rolled up. "We have brought the proper equipment," Sova said. He spoke standard with a precise, careful accent. "Our engineers are rated for high thermal recovery work. They will handle the extraction." Darren glanced at the 2 engineers. They were already reading the same thermal sensor he had. One of them made a sound, a low hiss that Sova later described in his report as distress vocalization. The other one took a step back. "It is above our tolerance threshold," one of them said to Sova. "Significantly above. Contact would cause immediate and serious tissue damage." Sova nodded. He turned back to Darren. "We will need to wait for it to cool. Estimated time." 7 hours, Darren said. "At least. Maybe 9. He set down the thermal sensor and looked at the coupling. It sat in its housing like a piece of bad news, glowing faintly, still ticking with heat. "We don't have 9 hours. The port window closes and we lose our slot. Captain doesn't want to lose the slot." "The temperature is—" "I know what the temperature is." Darren picked up a heavy rag from his toolbox. He folded it twice. Then he reached into the housing, wrapped the rag around the coupling, and lifted it free. The rag began to smoke immediately. Darren walked the coupling to the workbench and set it down. He dropped the rag. He looked at his hand. The palm was red, the skin tight and shiny from the heat. He flexed his fingers once, slowly, checking the joints. Then he smiled. Not a big smile, just the quiet kind, the kind that means everything is fine. Sova did not move for several seconds. The 2 station engineers stared. One of them looked at the thermal sensor, then at Darren's hand, then back at the sensor, as if checking whether the laws of physics were still working correctly. "You—" Sova started. "The coupling's out," Darren said. He was already picking up a wrench. "Now I can get to the seal. That's the real problem anyway. The coupling just made it hard to reach." He leaned back into the housing. "You can probably tell your engineers to stand down. I've got it from here." Sova did not tell his engineers to stand down. He stood very still in the doorway of the engine bay and watched Darren work for a long time. Darren did not seem to notice. Later, when Sova filed his report to Commander Vreth, he sat for 3 minutes in front of his screen before he started typing. He chose his words carefully. He wrote, "Observed human technician make direct, unprotected contact with component registering hazardous thermal output. Technician showed no signs of incapacitation. Minor tissue response visible on right palm. Technician continued working without interruption." He paused. Then he added, "Recommend biological review." Then he added, "This was not an accident." He knew what he was doing. Back in Bay 7, Darren finished pulling the seal housing apart and found exactly what he expected. A cracked thermal gasket, warped on one side. A 4-credit part that had almost cost them their port window. He replaced it, torqued everything back down, and ran the startup check. The thrusters came online clean. He packed up his tools, turned off the bay light, and went to find something to eat. His hands still hurt. Not badly. Not in a way that mattered. It was just heat, and he had known heat his whole life, and his hands carried the proof of that. Years of it, burned into the skin, healed over, built into who he was. He did not think of it as toughness. He thought of it as knowing his job. The data room on Verith Station was small and cold and smelled like recycled air. Sova sat at the terminal and pulled everything he could find on human biology, and by the second hour he had stopped taking notes because he did not know what to do with what he was reading. Commander Vreth arrived without announcement. He was older than Sova, thicker across the shoulders, with the kind of face that had stopped showing surprise years ago. He looked at the screen, then at Sova, then at the screen again. "You filed an anomaly report," Vreth said. "Yes, Commander. About a mechanic. About a human mechanic, yes." Vreth pulled up a chair and sat. "Show me." Sova brought up the footage from Bay 7. The angle was clear. The thermal sensor reading on the left side of the frame, Darren's unprotected hand on the right, the moment of contact, the walk to the workbench, the dropped rag, still smoking, the casual flex of fingers. Vreth watched it twice. He did not speak. Sova pulled up Dr. Ossa's summary next. Ossa was the station's xenobiologist, and she had responded to the anomaly request within an hour. What she sent back was thorough, and in Sova's opinion, deeply unsettling. "Read the third paragraph," Sova said. Vreth read it aloud. "Human skin contains specialized cells that regenerate after thermal trauma. Repeated exposure over time results in increased tolerance, both structural in terms of thickened dermal layers and neurological in terms of reduced signal sensitivity in damaged nerve pathways. In practical terms, a human who has experienced significant burn injury before will feel less pain from the same injury than a human experiencing it for the first time." Vreth stopped. "It gets worse?" "Keep reading." In addition to structural adaptation, humans produce a series of internal chemicals during high stress or high pain situations that suppress pain signaling and simultaneously increase physical output. These chemicals are involuntary. They are not a decision. The body produces them automatically when it detects damage or threat. Vreth set the document down. Sova said, "So when I asked Dr. Ossa if the mechanic felt the heat, she said yes. The damage was happening. His body registered it. But his body was also compensating in real time, suppressing the signal, keeping him functional." Sova folded his hands. "She used a phrase I found difficult to translate cleanly. She said, 'His body knows how to be hurt and keep going. It has been practicing for a long time.'" Vreth was quiet for a moment. Outside the data room, the station hummed its usual hum. Cargo was moving. Ships were docking. Everything was normal. "Pull his records," Vreth said. Sova already had them open. Darren Cole, 34 years old, had been working ship maintenance since he was 19. 3 documented burn incidents over his career. The first was a fuel line failure on a small freight hauler. He had received treatment and returned to work in 4 days. The second was a cable snap under load that had taken skin off the back of his right hand. 2 days off, no further follow-up. The third was a fire. The third entry was longer. An engine room fire aboard a ship called the Marrow. 2 crew members had not made it out. Darren Cole had. He had also, according to the incident report, gone back in once to close a fuel valve before the fire suppression system activated, because if the valve stayed open, the fire would reach the main tank and destroy the ship. He went back in, after he was already out. He returned to work 11 days later. Vreth read the Marrow entry twice. He said nothing for a long time. "I pulled wider records after that," Sova said. He brought up a new file. Not Darren's file, but a broader survey of human workers across Verith Station's docking and service ring. "I started watching the footage, casually, looking for similar behavior. a dock worker on the loading platform, carrying crates stacked higher than her head. When one slipped, she caught it with her forearm and held the stack long enough to get it to the trolley. The crunch of impact was audible on the recording. She shook her arm and went back to work. A maintenance worker lying inside a conduit access panel, both arms fully inside, working by touch in a space barely wide enough for his shoulders. 40 minutes in that position. A cook in the shared mess hall, draining a large pot, steam curling around her hands, adjusting her grip without gloves and walking it to the sink. Vreth watched each clip without speaking. Sova said, "None of them are doing anything remarkable, by their own standards. They are simply working. They do not know how dangerous they appear to us. I do not think it would change anything if they did." Sova closed the files one by one. "That is what I find most difficult to process, Commander. It is not that they are careless. Their technique is good. Their judgment is sound. They simply have a different relationship with damage than any other species in the registry." Vreth stood. He moved to the door, then stopped. "The mechanic's hand," he said. "Is it being treated?" Sova checked his notes. He asked a deck worker where the medkit was kept. He was directed to it. He treated it himself. Vreth nodded slowly. He left without saying anything else. Sova stayed at the terminal a while longer. He went back to the Bay 7 footage. He watched the moment again. The reach, the lift, the walk, the drop of the rag, the flex of fingers, the quiet smile. He watched it 3 more times. He still did not know what to do with it. The shared mess hall on Varath Station served food for 11 different species. The system worked because most of them agreed not to look too closely at what everyone else was eating. Darren had a bowl of something that was technically described on the station menu as a grain-protein mix, and practically tasted like slightly warm nothing. He was working his way through it without complaint when Sova sat down across from him. Sova placed his own tray down carefully. He did not start eating. He looked at Darren in the direct, unblinking way that Vareth looked at things they were trying to understand. "You are the mechanic from Bay 7, Sova said. "Darren." He offered his hand without thinking, his right hand, the one with the fresh burn across the palm, now covered by a strip of medical tape. Sova looked at the hand. He did not shake it. "You know why I am here," Sova said. "You filed a report on me." Darren set down his spoon. "I heard from the captain." She thought it was funny. "It was not intended to be." "I know." Darren picked up his spoon again. "Ask what you want to ask." Sova was quiet for a moment. Then a younger Vareth slid into the seat beside him. Tallow, one of the station's junior technicians. Tallow had clearly followed Sova here and was trying to look like he had not. He nodded at Darren with the wide-eyed energy of someone who had watched the Bay 7 footage several times. Sova said, "I want to understand what happened in the engine bay. The thermal reading on that component was high enough to destroy muscle tissue on contact. Our engineers would not approach it in full protective equipment." "Yeah, I noticed. You picked it up with your hands, with a rag. The rag was burning within seconds." Darren looked at his palm. He turned it over once, then set it flat on the table. "There's hot and then there's hot. What you saw was well within range if you move fast and don't hold too long. I've been in hotter situations." Tallow leaned forward. "The scars on your hands. Are those from before?" Darren glanced at his hands. Both of them were mapped with old marks. Pale lines, smooth patches, places where the skin sat differently from the skin around it. He had stopped noticing them years ago. "That one," he said, pointing to a thick ridge along the base of his left thumb. "Cable snap. Line went under full load and came back at me. This one," he pointed to the back of his right hand where the skin was slightly shinier. "Fuel line split on a ship called the Dura. And these..." He turned both wrists over, where the inside skin was mottled and uneven. "That was a fire." Tallow stared. "A fire," Sova said carefully. "You were inside it?" "I went back in for a valve." Darren said it simply. "If the valve stayed open, the fire would have spread to the main tank. We would have lost the ship." "You were already out?" "Yes." "And you went back?" Darren seemed to consider whether this required more explanation. He decided it did not. The ship needed it. Tallow looked at Sova. Sova looked at Darren. "Among our people," Sova said slowly, "a body that has been badly damaged once is considered a body that carries weakness. Not the person, but the tissue. The injury leaves the area less reliable. Our workers who experience serious trauma are usually reassigned to lower-risk roles. It is considered wisdom." Darren nodded. "I've heard that about a few species." "You disagree." "I don't disagree. It's different for us." He was quiet for a moment, choosing words. "When I got burned the first time, it hurt. A lot. When I got burned the second time, I already knew what it felt like. I knew it wasn't going to kill me. I knew how long it would last and how bad the worst of it would be." He looked at the table. "The third time, it was a fire, and 2 men died, and I still have nights where that sits on me. But my hands..." He opened them both on the table, face up. "My hands came back. The skin came back. The grip came back. You get damaged, and then you get the experience of having survived the damage. And that second part is something our bodies actually keep." Tallow said, very quietly, "That sounds terrible." Darren smiled. It was the same quiet smile from Bay 7. "It sounds like a job." At the far end of the mess hall, Captain Lena Marsh had been watching the conversation over the top of her own meal. She lifted her drink an inch off the table in a small private toast and went back to eating. Sova looked down at his tray. He picked up his own utensil and started eating, slowly, thinking. "One more question," he said. "Go ahead." "When you picked up the coupling, when the rag started to burn." Sova met his eyes. "What were you thinking?" Darren considered it honestly. "I was thinking about the gasket behind it," he said. "I was thinking that was the real problem. The coupling was just in the way." Sova nodded once. He did not say anything more. But when he filed his follow-up report that evening, he removed the phrase "possible biological threat." He replaced it with something that took him a long time to word correctly. He wrote, "Humans are not damaged by their damage. They are built by it." He read it back. He left it. 3 days after the mess hall conversation, Darren was running post-repair diagnostics on the cradle when the sector alarm activated. Lower docking ring, coolant breach, corridor 7 south, pressure failure in secondary line, superheated coolant under pressure, spraying a corridor, non-toxic but scalding. He grabbed his jacket and moved. The lower docking ring smelled different when he got there, wet and hot and sharp, like the air itself had been wrung out. He followed the sound. The spray was audible from 30 meters away, a hard hiss that echoed off the corridor walls. He found the situation at the T-junction near cargo processing. The coolant line had split where it connected to the junction housing. The fluid was coming out sideways in a pressurized arc, covering the entire width of the corridor at chest height. Solid wall of superheated mist from one side to the other. On the far end of that corridor, maybe 15 meters back, was the manual shutoff valve. A red wheel mounted on the wall, accessible only by hand. Station engineer Bren was standing at the safe end with a handheld, trying to trigger the remote shutoff. The remote had already failed. That was why the manual valve existed. 2 other engineers were behind Bren. One of them was holding a full thermal suit, sealed at every joint. She was trying to put it on quickly, hands shaking. "How long to seal that suit properly?" Darren asked. Bren turned. He recognized Darren from Base 7. His expression was not relief. It was something more complicated. 12 minutes minimum. If rushed, gaps in the seal. The temperature in that spray is, how long until the pressure hits the junction at ring 6? Bren checked his handheld. He did not want to say the number. 9 minutes. When it does, the blast door auto-seals, and this section loses atmosphere management. The cargo ring depressurizes. How many people are in the cargo ring? 14. They have been alerted. Evacuation is in progress, but 9 minutes isn't enough. No. Darren looked at the corridor. 15 meters. The spray was at chest height. If he angled low and moved fast, maybe half of that was exposed. The floor would be wet, slick. The ambient heat in the corridor was already climbing. His jacket was canvas, worn thin at the shoulders, not insulated, not rated for anything. He tied it around his left arm, layering the fabric twice over his forearm. Bren said, "The temperature on contact." "I know." He angled toward the wall and went in low. The heat hit first, a wall of it, pressing against his face, his neck, his hands. The spray caught him on the left side. Arm, shoulder, the edge of his jaw. He felt it the way he always felt bad heat. As a fact first, pain second. His brain registered damage before his body decided to care about it. He did not stop moving. The floor was slick with condensed coolant. His boot slid on the third step and he caught himself on the wall with his right hand. The wall was hot too, radiating from the pipe behind it. He kept going, head down, eyes on the red wheel at the end. 11 seconds. He counted them without deciding to. He reached the valve. He grabbed it with both hands. It was stiff. Old fittings, not turned in years. He put his weight into it. His left shoulder screamed from the spray burn. He turned it anyway. The valve moved. He kept turning. The hiss died. Not instantly. It faded, pressure dropping, the arc losing force and then collapsing to a trickle and then nothing. The sudden quiet was enormous. Darren stood at the end of the corridor. Steam was rising off his jacket. There was a red line across the left side of his neck where the spray had caught exposed skin. His left forearm, under the jacket layers, felt like it was still on fire. He walked back through the corridor. The air was still hot, but the spray was gone. He came out the other side and found Bren and the engineers exactly where he had left them. Sova was there too. He had arrived at some point during the 11 seconds. He was standing very still. Darren looked at his arm. The fabric was stuck to his forearm where the spray had been worst. He did not pull it off. "Medkit," he said. His voice was level. "I'll need the medkit." Sova said, "You are injured." "Yeah." Darren looked back at the corridor. The alarm code had changed. Pressure stabilized. The cargo ring was fine. 14 people were still breathing. But the station isn't. He sat down on a cargo crate. Bren turned to the engineers behind him and said something in Varath. Darren did not speak it, but he recognized the tone. The same in any language when someone is trying to explain something that should not need explaining. Sova crouched in front of Darren and looked at the burn on his neck. "Does it hurt?" Sova asked. "Yes, but you are calm." Hurting and panicking are two different things. Darren held up his burned arm. The jacket fabric had started to peel away. Underneath, the skin was red and angry. "I know what a burn is. I've had burns. This is a burn. I know what comes next, and I know it heals." He looked at Sova. "When you know a thing well enough, it stops being frightening." The medkit arrived. Darren treated the burns himself. Sova watched and said nothing. Outside, through the viewport at the end of the corridor, 14 people were finishing their evacuation of a cargo ring that never lost atmosphere. Because of 11 seconds. Because of a man who knew what burns felt like. The station's medical bay had white walls and a low hum from the ventilation system and a smell like clean nothing. Darren sat on the edge of the treatment cot with his left arm extended while the med unit ran its scan. Sova had followed him in. He had not asked permission. He had simply come in and sat in the chair beside the door, and Darren had not told him to leave. The scan finished. Second-degree burns on the forearm, partial thickness. The neck burn was superficial. It looked worse than it was. The med unit recommended a skin repair patch and 48 hours of low activity. Darren looked at the recommendation. He looked at Sova. 48 hours, Sova said. "We'll see." Sova clasped his hands in his lap. He had been quiet since the corridor, turning something over in his mind that he had not yet decided how to say. He said it now. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know I am not asking it to offend you." "Ask? Is there a program? A system? Some kind of training that humans go through that produces—" He paused. "What I watched you do today?" Darren almost smiled. "No. Nothing official? Nothing documented?" "Sova." Darren applied the skin repair patch to his forearm and pressed it flat. I grew up on a mining station in the outer belt. My father worked hull maintenance. His hands looked like mine do now, but worse. I started working with him when I was 12. Small jobs, passing tools, learning how things came apart and went back together. He smoothed the edge of the patch. Nobody trained me to go through that corridor. I just knew what it would cost and decided it was worth it. How did you know it was worth it? 14 people. Sova was quiet. That simple? He asked. That simple. The door opened and Commander Vreth stepped in. He was not in his full uniform, just a gray station jacket, which on Vreth somehow looked more formal than the uniform. He looked at Darren's arm. He looked at Sova. He pulled a second chair from the wall and sat. I'm not here officially, Vreth said. All right, Darren said. Vreth reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data pad. He set it on the treatment cot between them. That corridor you went through, the one with the spray. He waited for Darren to nod. That is one of 43 locations on this station that require regular maintenance in conditions our current contracted crews will not enter. Some are thermal, some are high radiation, some are pressure differential work. Difficult, specific, close tolerance environments. Darren looked at the data pad. The station was built partly by human construction crews. 40 years ago, Vreth continued. That contract ended. The crews moved to other projects. We brought in other contractors. Most of them last one rotation before they request reassignment. Some do not make it one rotation. What happened to the human crews? Darren asked. Their contract was retired after the third major incident on site. Darren looked at the data pad. He was already reading the technical descriptions. High thermal junction access, pressure crawl space, 0.4 atmo differential, radiation adjacent conduit, periodic direct exposure during active service. He recognized most of them. He had worked in all of them at some point, or something close. You want to ask if we'd consider a longer contract, Darren said. I want to ask if you would be willing to discuss it with your captain. She's going to want numbers. We have numbers. Sova said, I want to add something. Bren has been doing structural maintenance for 22 years. He is very good. He would not go through that corridor in his own equipment. He met Darren's eyes. He came to me afterward and asked what species Darren was. I told him human. He said he had worked alongside humans before but never seen one do that. He paused. He asked if it was normal. What did you tell him? I told him I was still finding out. Darren set the data pad down. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, thinking about Lena, thinking about the crew, thinking about what a longer contract on a station meant versus another 6 months of cargo routes that paid the same amount no matter how hard you ran them. I'll talk to the captain, he said. Vreth stood. He picked up the data pad. He started for the door and then stopped. He said, without turning around, the crews that built this station, the 3 major incidents, fire, decompression, structural collapse, 11 injured total, 7 returned to work within 2 weeks, 3 more within the month. He paused. 1 retired. He had been working construction for 30 years. He said he had simply decided he was done. Not because of the injury, because he was tired. Darren said nothing. He was 64. He had started at 26. Vreth finally turned. He looked at Darren's bandaged arm. I did not understand that record when I read it. I think I understand it better now. He left. Sova stayed. Through the small medbay window, the stars were the usual white punctures in the black. Do you ever think about stopping? Sova asked. Darren looked at his arm, at the patch over the burn, at the older scars underneath it. Sometimes, he said, when I'm tired. And then the ship needs something, or the station does, or somebody does. He flexed his fingers. They moved clean and sure. And I know how to help. So I do. Sova thought about that for a long time. He did not have an answer for it. He did not think one was needed. 1 month later, the Cradle of Rust was still docked at Vareth Station. It had a new paint mark on the hull, not decoration, just a classification stripe in station orange that meant contracted maintenance crew, extended term. Lena Marsh had negotiated the numbers for 3 days before she was satisfied. The crew had voted. The vote had not been close. Now they worked. Today's assignment was the thermal junction cluster on sublevel 4, 6 access points, all of them rated beyond Vareth tolerance, all of them overdue for service. The crew split into pairs and moved through the level with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from years of working together in tight spaces where talking too much was a waste of breath. Sova was their liaison. He shadowed Darren's pair, Darren and a young crew member named Fen, who was 23 and had grown up on a ship the same way Darren had and approached difficult conditions with the cheerful practicality of someone who had never learned to think of them as unusual. The first 4 junctions were clean. The 5th had a cracked insulation sleeve that needed replacement. The 6th was the problem, a corroded bracket inside a housing that ran hot from the nearby coolant feeds. The housing interior was not as bad as the coupling from Bay 7. It was still not somewhere a Varath engineer would put their hands. Darren reached in. He replaced the bracket. He came out with red marks on his knuckles from brushing the housing wall. He checked the fit with his free hand and sealed the panel. Fen was already moving to the next task. On a monitoring screen 20 meters away, 4 young Varath technicians were watching the feed from sublevel 4. Tallow was one of them. He had asked to be assigned to the monitoring station specifically. One of the others, a technician named Voss, new to the station, kept leaning closer to the screen. When Darren's hand came out of the housing with fresh marks on the knuckles, Voss made a low sound. "Does it not hurt?" Voss asked. Tallow had been thinking about this question since the mess hall conversation. He had finally arrived at something close to true. "It hurts," Tallow said. "I asked." He confirmed it. "Then why?" "Because it does not stop him." Tallow watched Darren seal the last junction panel. "I asked him about that too. He said fear is useful. It tells you where the edges are. But you do not have to live at the edges. You can learn where they are and work just inside them." He paused. He said his hands know the edges now. They have known them a long time. Voss was quiet. "He said it in a simpler way than that," Tallow added. "He said, 'I know this. I've done this. The knowing makes it smaller.'" On the screen, Darren and Fen were packing up their tools. Shift done. All 6 junctions serviced. All of them cleared. End of shift. The whole crew met in the shared mess, as they did every day now. It had become a habit without anyone deciding it should be. The cradle crew came in, found a table, ate whatever the station menu was offering that evening. Sova had started joining them sometime in the 2nd week. Tallow came when his shift allowed. Tonight the station menu had something that smelled genuinely good. Darren had 2 portions. His burns from the coolant incident a month ago had healed to the same pale, smooth-edged marks as everything else on his hands and arms. New entries in a long record. He flexed his left hand under the table sometimes, not from pain, just from the habit of checking that everything still moved the way it should. It did. Sova arrived late. He was carrying something. A bottle, dark glass, sealed with a pressed cap. Vareth ceremonial drink. Used at launches, completions, significant passages. He set it on the table without announcing it. Lena looked at the bottle. She looked at Sova. "Is that what I think it is?" "It is the appropriate drink for the completion of a first successful contract period," Sova said. He sat. "We are 1 month in. The maintenance backlog on sublevel 4 is cleared for the first time in 6 years. The station commander wanted me to convey his formal appreciation." Fen said, "I'll take appreciation in drink form." Sova opened the bottle. He poured for everyone. The crew, himself, Tallow, who had appeared at the table with the timing of someone who had been standing nearby waiting. Lena raised her cup. "To the station." Darren raised his. "To the job." Sova raised his last. He had been thinking about what to say since the night in the medical bay. He had tried several versions and discarded them. This was the one he had kept. "To the species that knows what pain is," he said, "and works anyway." No one said anything for a moment. Then Fen said, "I'll drink to that," and did, and the table relaxed, and people started talking about something else, the easy talk of a crew that was tired in a good way, and the mess hall filled with the sound of it. Darren drank. He set his cup down. He looked at his hands the way he sometimes did, not thinking about them, just seeing them. The map of every job he had ever worked, every ship, every coupling, every stuck valve in a hot corridor, every ship that kept flying because he had been there. He turned his cup in his scarred hands and listened to his crew talk and thought about nothing in particular. The station hummed around them. Outside in the black ships came and went. Everything was fine.